Hi everybody, my name is Bo Sanders, and last week I talked to you about the culture of conflict, and we used a perfect storm analogy. I actually enjoyed the feedback that I got and think that I've been able to hone that, polish it up a little bit, and so I want to talk this week about some case studies. But I'm going to change the analogy a little bit. I'm going to keep the same 5 elements as before, but I want to talk about for each of these issues that we're going to talk about in our argument or contentious culture, you have 3 piles of kindling or 3 logs. You need some heat or gas, and then you need a trigger. So those are going to be our 5 elements. So we'll take Second Amendment, abortion, policing strategies, and voting. Those are going to be our 4 case studies. And I know I'm going to be flying through this, but I just want to show you that in each of these 4 case studies, these 4 issues that come up in our culture, that all 5 of these elements are present. So we have individualism, a remnant or a remainder of a past form. Technology is an issue that is making things outsized and oversized beyond our comprehension. That you have something that heats or warms the atmosphere, makes it combustible, and then you need a trigger or a match or a catalyst or a spark. So in the first one, in the Second Amendment, you have all 5 of these. You have an individualism that is haunting us, where we talk about the rights of the individual gun owner, and we're trying to balance those with community benefits and safety. We have a remnant structure in the Second Amendment, and the militia language, and just the fact that they had muskets back then and not what we have now. You have a technology that has expanded the scope of this thing so that you have assault rifles and the militarization of nearly everything. And so that has changed the argument. So those are your 3 kind of piles of kindling or wood. Then that gets amplified by the 24-hour coverage of mass shootings. And so that increases the temperature in our culture and the animosity and the rhetoric that we use to discuss it. And then the trigger is that on one side you have people saying don't politicize in the wake of this tragedy, and on the other side gun sales skyrocket after mass shootings because Second Amendment culture, people are afraid that their guns are going to be taken by the government when they are banned. So that issue, you can see why it's so complicated, and that it is a round and around argument that seems to go nowhere and is never going to be resolved. You understand why the overlapping complications making it nearly impossible to talk about as a topic. So you have the individualism, sometimes for the choice of the individual woman, sometimes for the life of the unborn child, for those 2 sides of that argument. You have a remnant structure, which is an essentialist understanding of gender and sexuality, of the biology of women's bodies. You have a technology that expands this beyond most people's comprehension or ability to explain it, with sonograms, pregnancy tests, in vitro fertilization, sperm banks. I mean, this is stuff 100 years ago, 50 years ago, we did not have to deal with, and it is beyond most people's ability to understand or explain. So those are your 3 piles of kindling or wood. Then the heat comes from the echo chamber media, which it can't even see the other side. I mean, people who are really entrenched in this disagreement, they can't even put themselves into the mind of the other side and see even what motivates them or how they could possibly see it the way that they do. So that escalates and amplifies the intensity, the heat that's embedded in that argument. And then you have a trigger, which is Roe v. Wade. It's possibly being overturned, and the appointment of every Supreme Court justice for the last 30 years being contentious for this very issue. All right? So let's do policing strategies as our 3rd case study. So you have the individualism, again, on one side of the unarmed black men. Usually the seems to be the issue that right now is so prevalent in this conversation, versus defending any single good cop, even if policing structures are suspect, that the cop, they have a tough job, they're heroes, they have a good heart, right? So that's the individualism that that gets skewed when we try and talk about this issue as a larger structural examination. You have a remnant of a past that the policing structures as we currently know them are actually rooted in the Jim Crow South. And if you look into the history or the genealogy of how we came to have the policing structures and tactics that we have, it is eye-opening. They have a technology issue which has oversized and expanded beyond most people's ability to keep up with cell phone videos, body cams, riot gear, and the militarization tactics that have been brought back from Iraq and Afghanistan. The heat gets added when you have the echo chamber media, where you're not able to see the perspective of people on the other side. And then you have a trigger, which is access to the national media that provides a constant source of new stories. And so it is perpetually inflamed because it's always in front of us. So the last one is voting. In voting, you have the individualism of trying to combat any one person's vote versus the popular election. And so somebody can win the popular vote but lose, and so people start to think, well, what can one person do? What does one vote matter? You have a remnant of the Electoral College and gerrymandering. These are remnant structures from previous eras that are haunting us now. You have a technology issue, which is how do Russian bots and fake news stories on Facebook, how did they corrupt the election? You have instant voting results where they'll sometimes declare the winner on the news while people are still standing in line to vote. And then people leave the line because the winner's already been declared by the news. You have Citizens United, which is beyond the scope of most people's ability to comprehend how corporations count as individuals and then contribute the amounts of money that they do. It seems to pollute the entire system. So then the heat gets turned up in the argument culture where we have these echo chambers. We're self-selecting who we listen to and where we get our news from. And then the trigger, I think, started with those hanging chads down in Broward County in Florida with Gore v. Bush, and how that ultimately had to go before the Supreme Court. And just think about how different it would have been had Gore been president when 9/11 happened. It kind of baffles your brain. Prove it. I decided to give it another go and to use very specific case studies. Please let me know what you think. Is this helpful? Does this address some of your concerns about specific issues? Does it bring any light about why these conflicts are so complicated and why we never seem to have any hope of resolving them? So I would love to hear if you have an issue that we might apply these 5 issues to and see if it illuminates anything about the complexity that is embedded within that.